This is The Competitive Edge with Ben Greenfield. Welcome to The Competitive Edge. My name is Scott Britton, and I'm here to help you answer a question that we all have. How can I get an edge in my business and life? Each week, we're going to uncover how some of the most successful and inspiring entrepreneurs, entertainers, and thought leaders get an edge so you too can reach your full potential. Do you want more unique ideas and tactics like the ones we're about to share in this episode? Then you're going to want to do two things. The first is to subscribe to The Competitive Edge on iTunes so that you don't miss out on new ideas from future conversations. After this, you're going to want to go check out my main site, lifelonglearner.com. When you enter in your email address to join the Lifelong Learner community, you'll get access to my most advanced strategies to stack the deck in your favor. Again, that's life-longlearner.com. A while back, I asked one of my friends who the most impressive person he knew was. The reason I was curious is because he spends pretty much all of his time amongst tier 1 entrepreneurs, many of which live extraordinary lives. Without hesitation, he answered Ben Greenfield, who I'm honored to have as a guest on today's show. Quite simply, Ben is an absolute beast. He's competed in over 10 ultramarathons. His site, Ben Greenfield Fitness, is one of the most popular, well-researched sites on health and performance enhancement on the internet. And he also has a products and services company that sells a lot of cool stuff in the fitness and nutrition world. Today, Ben is just going to drop some serious knowledge on us about the human body and answer a lot of common questions that I've always had. Things like, what's the fastest way to build muscle and lose fat at the same time? How can I become a fat burning machine? And a whole lot of other things, including how our brains work for truly achieving peak performance. I even walked away from this conversation with a few new interesting tidbits of information on some of my favorite beverages like coffee and wine. If you're looking to achieve peak health and peak performance, which comes from peak health, you absolutely have to listen to this conversation with my man, Ben Greenfield. Maybe we're crazy. Whatever happens, we can keep to ourselves. Ben, what's up, man?
Hey, not much, Scott. Stoked to be here.
I am stoked to have you here, man. And boy, I feel like I'm talking to the encyclopedia of health and wellness. Such an honor to have you on the show, man.
Awesome. You really make me feel like I'm wearing a giant propeller hat when you say that.
Well, this is an audio-only Skype call, so you might actually be wearing one, and I just didn't know. So
yes, I am. That and only my underwear, which I do when I know that it's not a video podcast, just because I can. You feel lighter, more dynamic on your feet. I get it. Actually, I'm not. I'm bundled up pretty heavily because I keep my house relatively cold just to get a lot of the benefits of cold thermogenesis, but also probably partially because I'm just a cheapskate and I keep the house cold just because I've always done that. So anyways, yeah, I'm bundled up pretty heavily right now with my hoodie and my pants and all that jazz because it is cold here in Spokane right now.
Well, we are matching you in weather here in New York City, man. And, I was looking over all the different things we could talk about, man. And I guess one of the things that maybe we could just dive into right away, because it's been a question and something I've been trying to figure out and test on myself for years now, is how do we build muscle efficiently while losing fat at the same time? I would love to get your take on this.
Yeah. Well, I guess technically that seems like it would be impossible, right? And if you think about it, your body needs 2,500 calories to build a pound of muscle. That's about how many calories are in a pound of muscle. If you were to just take a pound of human muscle out of somebody and, deny your anti-cannibalistic tendencies and eat that muscle, it'd be about 2,500 calories worth. And so if you wanted to make a pound of muscle and say a week, if you wanted to gain a pound of muscle in a week, you would eat an extra, say 350 calories a day, right? And that would give you that caloric excess that you need to put on muscle. But then at the same time, a pound of fat is 3,500 calories. And so technically, if you wanted to lose a pound of fat, the advice is you eat 500 fewer calories than you're burning each day, so that you're not so you're able to tap into your storage fat and use that as energy. And so being at a 2,500 calorie excess per week to build muscle, while being at a 3,500 calorie deficit each week to burn fat, seems like it would be, like an impossibility just from a physics standpoint.
Seems like diametrically opposed.
Yeah, exactly. But they've done some really interesting studies, and they've found that it certainly is possible to gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously. And a big reason for this could be because muscle is actually able to store intramuscular triglycerides. Like when you get a fatty cut of like steak or wild caught fish or whatever, and it's got like all the marbly fats in it, a lot of that is just like fat that's stored in muscle tissue. And so there's some thoughts here that maybe what we're doing when we're building muscle and losing fat simultaneously is we're like repartitioning that fat into muscle tissue where it can be used as a readily available source of energy for muscle contractions. So like they did this one study, it was at California State University, and they tracked a group of guys for 8 weeks, and they fed them a lot of food. Like they were at over 4,000 calories a day. And these guys are doing weight training 4 days a week for 60 to 90 minutes. So a pretty significant amount of weight training. But that's actually what you need to do if you want to gain a significant amount of muscle. And these guys gained an average of about 6 pounds of muscle, but at the same time, they gained about a half pound of fat. So in that case, they were eating a lot of calories, they were gaining muscle, but they were also gaining fat. But then they did a very similar study at the same university where they pretty much did everything the same, except they gave them a little over 2,000 calories a day rather than over 4,000 calories a day. And that group also gained a significant amount of muscle, but they lost over 7 pounds of fat. And there was one other study that they did where they took women and they gave them 800 calories a day, which seems like an extreme caloric deficit. And I don't recommend that type of caloric deficit. But these women somehow gained muscle and lost fat simultaneously, even though you would have expected on a diet with that few calories that they'd just lose muscle, that they wouldn't gain muscle. But somehow the body is like repartitioning fat to be able to gain new muscle tissue. So the trick is, it appears, based off of the research that there is right now, that if you want to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, that what you need to do is be at a slight caloric deficit and then lift heavy stuff. So, what that might mean is like 3 to 4 days a week, you're hitting the weight room, and on most days of the week, you are at a slight caloric deficit, meaning if you technically need whatever, if your metabolism needs 2,500 calories a day, maybe you're just eating 2,200 calories a day. So you're giving yourself a 300 calorie deficit every single day. And then the last thing to realize is that there is some truth to this whole starvation syndrome thing, meaning that if you go for
the fasting stuff,
if you go for a long period of time at a caloric deficit, your metabolism set point down regulates, right? So you can actually lower your metabolism and do some damage to your thyroid if you're staying, technically it's more than 4 weeks at a caloric deficit. So what I like to do with somebody who's trying to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time is you put yourself at a caloric deficit, say like 6 days of the week. You lift weights 3 to 4 days of the week, but then you have 1 day of the week where you hit the reboot button and you refeed. So you just eat, that's like your cheat day, or your day where you're eating liberally or eating to the point where you're full, basically sending your body a message that it doesn't need to go into the starvation mode. And then you rinse, wash, and repeat each week, 6 days of caloric deficit with heavy lifting, and then 1 day of refeeding or refueling.
Is there a way because I know our bodies are all different, our physiques are all different amounts of muscle mass. Is there a good way for somebody to get a baseline on what just to maintain their current physique caloric intake should be?
Yeah, there's two ways to do that. One way would be you actually go to an exercise physiology lab, like you go to your local university, or you visit like your local exercise science facility. Usually, it's like a sports performance facility, and you ask for a metabolic rate test. And in this test, which is like the gold standard for figuring out your metabolic rate, you breathe into a tube while you're sitting or lying down for about 10 to 15 minutes. It measures your carbon dioxide produced, your oxygen consumed, and it kicks out not only how many calories that you're burning at rest, but how many of those calories are comprised of fat versus how many are comprised of carbohydrate. And that test typically costs anywhere from about 100 to 200 bucks to run. And most cities have a place, like if you were to just go online and do a Google search for metabolic test plus name of your city, you'd probably find one. But that's like the gold standard. And that's a really accurate way to measure. You can also approximate your metabolic rate based off of your height, your weight, your age, and your body fat percentage using an equation. Like there's one really good equation out there called the Harris-Benedict equation. There's a few others. I've got one website that was originally just a website for a book that I wrote, but I added a bunch of body fat calculators and stuff to it. They're all free. That's at getfitguy.com. And that's a good place to go if you just want like some free body fat calculators. But if you really want to get it like gold standard, like to the T for, exactly where you're at and also how many carbs and fats you're burning at rest, which is actually a pretty useful value to know to see whether or not you're adequately and efficiently burning fats, that resting metabolic rate test where you're actually breathing in and out of a tube is a really good one.
Is there anything that we can discern from a test like that might show that our body is actually not operating efficiently? Like for example, a lot of people, it seems like I know, like I'm eating right, I'm exercising, I can't lose weight. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, okay, is there a hormonal issue? Is there something else that is preventing them from actually losing weight? And I'm wondering what that test might show people if they're having trouble.
That test is like the one that a lot of people who are having difficulty losing weight will get so that they can come out the other side and say, see, I told you I had a low metabolism. But usually what happens is people get that test and it turns out their metabolism is humming along just fine. It's very rare that I see that a low metabolism, which a lot of people think is to blame for their weight gain, is actually the issue. Usually it's more like your shampoos and your soaps are full of endocrine disruptors and you're cleaning your house with a bunch of chemicals that are limiting your ability to lose fat because those are disrupting hormonal balance, or your blood work is messed up because you got inflammation from lack of sleep, that type of thing. But usually metabolism works just fine. But there is one number that you can pay attention to on that test that I like, and it's what's called the respiratory exchange ratio, or the RER. And that's related again to the carbon dioxide you produce and the oxygen that you consume. And what happens is when you breathe off carbon dioxide and the metabolic machinery analyzes those carbons, it tells you how many carbs you're burning at rest. And people who have a respiratory exchange ratio of about 0.8 or higher are typically eating a standard American diet, or a diet that's kind of shifted towards more carbohydrates, and they're sugar burners. They're not burning fat efficiently. And ideally, if you've trained yourself to become a fat burning machine by doing everything from, higher fat intake, carbohydrate limitation, intermittent fasting, a few fasted workouts, some of these other methods that you can use to enhance fat oxidation, your respiratory exchange ratio on that test is going to be below 0.8. And in somebody who's really humming along in terms of their fat burning machinery, I'll typically see it closer to about 0.7 for that RER number. So that's a really good way to check in and just see, okay, have I done a good job turning myself into a fat burning machine or enhancing fat oxidation? I think that's a more valuable metric that you can get from that test versus just your metabolic rate, because you could have somebody who's burning 2,000 calories at rest, right? And you could have another person who's also burning 2,000 calories at rest. But the person who is burning 2,000 calories at rest and is a fat burner is going to have less predisposition to chronic disease, to blood sugar dysregulation, to insulin resistance, et cetera, compared to the person who is burning 2,000 calories at rest, but who is a carb burner. So that's a good value you can give from that test.
Ben, you throw words around like fat burning machine, and I can't help but ask, how the heck do we become fat burning machines? I guess if we wanted to, I understand there's probably a zillion different ways to optimize and variables, but if there are some very low hanging fruit that people can reverse if they are like a carb burner, or somebody that burns sugars, what are the first couple things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I'd say the three biggest things that you could do to enhance fat oxidation. Number one would be to shift your macronutrient ratio towards fat intake. And the easiest way to do that is to get out to the grocery store and to get a bunch of like olives, extra virgin olive oil, avocados, wild caught fish, full fat yogurt, full fat coconut milk, and go home and just like throw out anything that says fat free, low fat, throw out most of the sweet carbs, the sugary carbs, stuff like that, and just begin to shift the diet until you get to the point where about 50 to 60% of your total dietary intake is comprised of fats. And incidentally, that is kind of like the prime ratio for most humans. That's actually what breast milk is 50 to 60% fat. It's very, very good for neuronal formation, for hormones, for steroids, and it's a good percentage of fat to still give you enough carbs and protein, but to also allow for you to primarily be relying upon fats as a fuel. So that's number one, is shift the foods that you're surrounded by to be more of the healthy fats. The second thing would be do fasted workouts. So train your body how to tap into fat as a fuel rather than carbs as a fuel. And the best way to do that, honestly, is just to quit eating at 8 p.m. at night, get up in the morning, 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. or whatever, get a workout in sometime between then and 9 or 10 a.m., and in that entire window, don't eat anything. So it's just water or even like coffee, which can actually help you tap into fatty acids even more efficiently. But basically, intermittent fasting combined with fasted workouts in the morning also helps you make that shift pretty well.
Yeah, that's my regimen. Is I usually do I do like the standard 16-hour fasted window with an 8-hour eating window, and I always work out before my first meal. And I have to say, I just have way more energy. My body has changed. And I know there's probably all different variants of doing the fast. You don't have to do the full 16 hours, but I'm definitely a buyer, man.
Yeah. And I mean, it really, if you want to get the most benefit out of that scenario, you would actually do your harder training when you are fueled, because you're able to push yourself a little bit more with more intensity. So if you're looking for like fitness, muscle gain, that type of thing, I'm a fan of a 2-a-day scenario where in the morning you're getting up in a fasted state and you're doing like yoga or an easy walk in the sunshine or some light restorative work, an easy swim, something like that. And then later on in the early afternoon or the evening, you're doing a harder, more intense weight training session or interval session where you're pushing a little bit harder at a time when your body is a little bit more primed to push harder. Because in the afternoon or the early evening, your body temperature peaks, your reaction time peaks, your what's called your post-workout protein synthesis peaks, which means you're more likely to take like what you eat for dinner and turn that into muscle. Rather than fat. And so there's a variety of benefits to like saving the intense stuff for later on in the day and doing the easy stuff in a fasted state earlier in the day. That's a nice 1-2 combo. So you shift your macronutrient ratios towards about 50 to 60% fat. You throw in fasted workouts, preferably most days of the week. And then the last thing would be to reduce inflammation. Inflammation is what actually keeps your body from tapping into fat stores. When you have inflammation, it downregulates what's this hormone called adiponectin, which is one of the primary hormones that allows you to mobilize adipose tissue, like the fat that you store in your butt, hips, thighs, wherever. And if that hormone is downregulated, you're not going to be able to tap into your body's own fat stores. And some of the primary sources of inflammation that I find even in the lifestyles and environments of people who are like living, quote unquote healthy or at least healthier than usual, would be exposure to electromagnetic fields, like lots of Wi-Fi routers and cell phones and TVs and electronics, just like 24/7. So kind of trying to mitigate your exposure to that type of stuff, hardwire into your router, limit your exposure to wireless signals, that type of thing. And then poor circadian rhythms. So not really sleeping on a sleep cycle that is ancestral, meaning, going to bed at midnight and sleep until 8 a.m. rather than going to bed at 10 p.m. and sleep until 6 a.m. Or looking at a lot of screens and, having lights in the bedroom and noise in the bedroom and kind of disrupting deep sleep from that standpoint. So I'm a big fan of sleep hygiene for shutting down inflammation. I'm a big fan of limiting exposure to electronic signals for decreasing inflammation. And then finally, like personal care products, household cleaning chemicals, all that kind of stuff can disrupt fat loss and create inflammation as well. So be pretty careful from that standpoint. Pick out a lot of natural stuff. You can clean your house with like lemon juice, vinegar, oil of oregano, and other essential oils rather than store-bought chemicals. And you can clean your body with things like, coconut oil and olive oil and like, Dr. Bronner soaps rather than, more other chemical-laden soaps. And, you can store your food in glass rather than plastic. And obviously, we could talk for like 3 hours about all the things you could do to maximize fat loss. But those are some of the places to start.
One thing I'm curious is like how 80/20 is a lot of this stuff, like the electromagnetic fields in our house. And, if we're using Old Spice shampoo, like body wash, like we're effed, like is that stuff like to really just get that like 1 to 5% extra edge, or is it actually like can really play a significant role?
It can play a significant role. So like they've done tests where they've had men take a shower with normal shampoo. I don't remember the brand that they used, but it was like, Suave-esque brand with parabens and phthalates and all that kind of stuff in it. And within 3 hours, they were peeing these chemicals out. They were literally saturated with these chemicals because your skin is a mouth. So for something like that, when it comes to chemicals, I wouldn't say I follow the 80/20 rule. I would say I'm surrounded by my own healthy personal care products that are chemical free. And when I travel with my little 3 to 4 ounce containers of these products and don't use the ones that are in the hotel rooms. When I'm eating, I eat organically. When I'm cleaning my house, I clean it with natural chemicals. I mean, like, there is no way to say whether it's 80/20, whether it's 90/10, whether it's 95/5, whether you're going to live till you're 72 years old versus you're 70 years old. I mean, like, it's ultimately it comes down to what you're comfortable with and what you're able to achieve. But in my opinion, the more that you can mitigate these factors, the better. And for me personally, I'm always trying to look, feel, and perform at the pointy edge of fitness and health. And this is the kind of stuff that works.
Yeah. Another one that I heard about, and I think I actually might have heard this on Jordan's podcast, The Art of Charm, with your interview, is deodorant seems to be another big one that can really mess people up.
Yeah, well, I mean, primarily with deodorants, the aluminum. That's the biggest issue with that, and it's very, very simple to just substitute like a natural, like a baking powder based deodorant, or even use like coconut oil, for example. Because it's really not your sweat that stinks; it's the bacteria that are consuming the nutrients in your sweat that stink. And so, if you can control the bacteria, then you don't have to worry that much when it comes to actual odor. And then if it's the actual perspiration, if you don't want to pit out, in your long sleeve shirt, then baking powder is a good way to mitigate that. There's this stuff that I'll often sprinkle in my armpits. It's called it's made by a company called Hammer Nutrition. It's like, essential clove and baking powder and some oregano and stuff like that. And that one's called Cool Feet. It was originally designed for marathoners who are running for long distances and wanted to keep their feet clean. But I sprinkle that in my pits and I'm good to go. But yeah, deodorant is another one you got to be careful with. So yeah, it's ironically that Axe body spray is probably decreasing testosterone.
Interesting. Yeah, we won't tell the people who make the nice commercials.
That you actually could get tackled by cheerleaders.
Yes, you could be, because you're getting weaker and less manly. So I guess if we're kind of like to kind of cohesively bring this together, the macronutrient so not only in terms of like putting on muscle quickly while losing fat, the lifting regimen with a slight caloric deficit, but it sounds like the appropriate diet is one with a macronutrient profile while doing that is 50 to 60% in fat, and then the others distributed amongst carbs and protein.
Yeah, preferably with the majority of the carbohydrates timed to be in like a post-workout scenario. So you like save your carbs for your workout when you're going to be more insulin sensitive and better able to simply partition those as energy rather than have them converted into fat.
Right. And I guess one thing I'm curious is like, I'm always trying to figure out, or I guess stick to like what I consider like better carb options, especially if you're like carb cycling post workout. Just for people that maybe aren't less familiar, like what are some like good like safe carb staples for like a solid diet to put on muscle?
Yeah. So ultimately, like a lot of people talk about the glycemic index, like high versus low glycemic index. They'll say like, whatever, white bread has a really high glycemic index, whereas like whatever, quinoa, right, has a low glycemic index. Ultimately, that doesn't matter after workout. You're pretty much bulletproof to the glycemic index of a food after a workout. And your body could take pure sugar and it could partition that as glucose back into muscle tissue to get you ready for the next day's workout. And it could do the same thing with whatever, millet or some, sprouted bread or something like that. So the glycemic index isn't as important to pay attention to as much as the nutrient density, right? So if I'm going to be shoving calories into my body post-workout, I'd ideally like to not just be getting energy to refuel that workout, but I'd also like to be getting as many nutrients and minerals and vitamins as possible. So when I'm looking at carbs, if you look at something like white rice, white bread, sugar, sports drinks, etc., yeah, they're pretty decent on the energy density scale, but not very high on the nutrient density scale. Whereas if you look at like sweet potatoes, yams, raw seeds, nuts, and nut butters, even if you look at like some of these like grains and grasses like quinoa and amaranth and millet and, even oats and stuff like that, those are a lot more nutrient dense forms of carbohydrates and are technically superior sources when it comes to refueling post workout. And a lot of people will say, well, I don't have time to make, they hear about this 20-minute magical post workout window and they're like, I don't have time to make like whatever quinoa with wild caught fish in that 20-minute window. When the fact is you remain insulin sensitive for up to 2 hours post workout. And for me personally, I don't take in any of these like magical post workout fuels, right? Like the powders and the bars and stuff like that. I'll usually finish that afternoon or early evening workout that I was talking about. And honestly, most days I have a glass of wine after I finish the workout. And then sometime within 2 hours after that workout, we sit down for dinner as a family. And that's my post-workout meal because I know that I've got a good 2 hour window. So you don't have to rush out to get that meal right away. Just look for a nice nutrient-dense meal that you can get in post-workout that's preferably comprised of nutrient-dense carbohydrates. Skip the sweet stuff, skip the sports drinks, skip the maltodextrin mixed with whey protein powder, and just eat a real meal with real carbs. Again, like sweet potato, yam, quinoa, amaranth, millet, some of these healthier, like sprouted, fermented breads, like sourdough bread, that type of stuff. Any of those are fine.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've switched to meals over the past year post workout instead of the whole shake thing, which I was doing for the longest time ever because that's what the magazines and the football coaches told me to do. And it's funny. I noticed that when I had the shakes and stuff, all it really did was make me real hungry in like a 30 or hour afterwards. And that may be because there was sugar and other stuff in it. But since I've switched to meals, I just feel way more satisfied.
Yeah. And then just to understand from a physiological standpoint, the way that your gut works is it gradually bleeds amino acids and sugars into your body after you've eaten a meal for several hours. So what this means is that let's say you're listening in and you are lifting or you're working out because you want to pack on some size, you want to put on some muscle, and you hear about this magical post-workout feeding window. But a lot of times what people don't realize is whatever they ate before the workout is still getting fed from their gut into their muscles during the workout and after the workout. So let's say you're working out at like 5 p.m. at the end of the workday, and you had some kind of a snack at like 3 or 4 p.m., like, like my snack, honestly, a lot of times in the afternoon, just because I like it and it tastes like ice cream, is I'll take like some coconut milk and put like some nuts and a little bit of protein powder and some chocolate in there and eat that. And that slow bleed keeps me going for a long time. And physiologically, I don't need anything after the workout because I'm technically still getting a lot of those things in my body from that pre-workout meal. So understand that the pre-workout meal counts, or that, whatever you had in the afternoon, for example, will count for like an afternoon or evening workout.
Sure. I'm very curious to get your opinion on the wine, actually, because I always have heard my whole life that, drink a glass of like dry red wine, it's good for you. And then the New York Times came out with a study, like essentially like just talking about like resveratrol or resveratrol or however you say it, like not actually being as a potent when in certain types of or effective in certain types of wines for your health. And I guess I would love to just get your opinion, because I feel like there's just a ton of stuff out there saying different things right now.
Yeah, I mean, so start here. A good like organic red wine, right, that hasn't been sprayed with a bunch of pesticides and herbicides, and that has a lot of those grape skins and grape compounds floating around in it. It's going to be super rich in like flavanols and polyphenols and antioxidants. You look around the produce section of any grocery store, and it's the dark fruits and the dark vegetables that do your body a huge favor. Pomegranates and blueberries and darker vegetables like kale and purple cabbage and bok choy and spinach, like all these colorful pieces of produce. They're so good for your body, for your skin, for your blood. And when you look at wine, really, it's just like a liquid version of that. And especially like an organic wine. So you certainly are getting a lot of antioxidants. When it comes to resveratrol, specifically, what that study that amplified the benefits of resveratrol was looking at was its ability to keep your telomeres from shortening, which anything that does that, it means that it's essentially having an anti-aging effect. There are other compounds out there that do it too, Chinese herbs and astragalus and all sorts of things. But what it turned out to be was that the amount of resveratrol used in that study was what you'd get from many, many bottles of wine, right? You'd have to drink just like a ton of wine to get as much resveratrol as they were finding actually had an effect in those studies. And so they said, well, whatever, it's full of bunk. Wine's not actually good for you. When in fact, all that was being disproven was that wine doesn't necessarily have an anti-aging effect unless you drink a ton of it, when we're looking at just the resveratrol portion of that wine. Well, if you look at some of the longest living cultures on the face of the planet, right, like there are usually pretty liberal sources of antioxidant-rich liquids, such as coffee and tea and wine, and even like homebrewed beers and things like that, like the island of Krakos, in Greece, or a lot of these other blue zones. There's some type of antioxidant-rich beverage that they're consuming. So I'm a fan of wine. I also like it from a de-stressing standpoint.
Oh yeah,
I like it because like post-workout in the afternoon, and I've finished a workout, it's on an empty stomach. It spins a few dials. It's a good way to kind of de-stress at the end of the day. And honestly, like one 4 to 6 ounce glass of red wine, and I feel pretty good after I've finished a workout. And it's also pretty guilt-free because most of the glucose and the fructose and the sugars in that wine, because it is a little bit energy dense, those are just getting partitioned as energy, rather than getting converted into fat, which is what might happen if I were to consume a glass of wine or two with a meal. So I'm a fan of wine, and the only caution I would give people is, when you do drink wine with a meal, technically you need more of it to feel its effects, because the components of the meal are inhibiting some of the absorption of the alcohol in the wine. And the other thing is that if you aren't choosing an organic wine, you are drinking herbicides and pesticides, and those can disrupt some of your gut bacteria and be not all that healthy for you. So I choose organic wines in most cases.
Is there a way to discern? Because for me, I just haven't even ever paid attention to whether my wine's organic. Is there a way to discern that on the labeling?
The word organic.
Yeah, I guess I don't even know if that's on a label. I certainly buy organic produce, but organic wine has never even been on my radar.
I actually drink organic, don't laugh, boxed wine.
Dude, I was with a guy who does box wine today.
Yeah, boxed wine actually retains its flavor very, very well, keeps the wine from oxidation. It's easier to control your consumption of it because you don't open a bottle and then feel the pressure to consume that whole bottle before it gets skunky.
Yep.
And boxed wine just stays good. So there's one box of boxed wine in my pantry every day, and you go fill it up with one glass, and it's pretty easy peasy. I use a brand called Badger right now. It's Badger organic red wine. It's not something I would serve with a filet mignon, and it's not the fanciest of the organic wines out there, but it works just fine for my afternoon/evening glass of red wine.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to my buddy's box red wine. It's called Public House. It's here in New York City, and one of the things that he taught me is that you kind of touched upon it, is that when you buy box wine, it actually retains its flavor for up to 30 days, which, as you said, for me, the longest time I go to Trader Joe's, buy my $2 chuck, and then feel this pressure like, dude, if I don't drink this in the next 2 days, this is going to taste like crap. So, I was like inducing myself into buzzes frequently just to finish the bottle instead of actually just drinking the amount that I wanted to.
Yeah, and they do make the wine saver things that you put on the top and you like pump it and everything, but I'm lazy. I like the boxed wine.
I guess while we're talking liquids here, another thing that was interesting to me in your book, Beyond Training, was this idea of like having how caffeine over time like literally changes our brain chemistry.
Yeah, caffeine.
Maybe you could touch upon that, because I thought this was super fascinating. I'm a huge coffee drinker, and the question mark started going off after I was reading this.
Yeah, it competes for a molecule called adenosine in your brain. And adenosine is something that would normally be a molecule that would help you to sleep. It's like adenosine binds to the adenosine receptors in your brain and causes you to become tired at night when it's time to go to bed. The problem is that as you consume caffeine and it fits into that same receptor that adenosine fits into, your brain creates more and more adenosine receptors, and more adenosine receptors need to be filled. And so eventually it gets harder and harder for your body to become responsive to the adenosine that it's naturally producing at night, just because there's so many more receptors that need to be filled because you've been drinking coffee or caffeine. Now, the cool thing is that it takes about 10 to 12 days to downregulate all those adenosine receptors that you've built and to resensitize yourself to caffeine, and also to be able to fall asleep easier. So a really good strategy is to simply, for every 4 to 6 weeks of coffee that you drink, like every month to month and a half, take about a week or two and switch to decaf. So you're still getting the flavor, you're still getting, the taste of the coffee, you're still getting your morning habit fix or whatever, but you're pushing the reboot button on the adenosine receptors. For me, this is pretty easy to do because I compete. Like I compete in triathlons and obstacle races and things like that. And one of the things that caffeine has been shown to do is it's an ergogenic aid. It enhances sports performance, but it mostly only does so if you abstain from it for about 7 to 10 days going into competition. So for me, since I'm competing about once a month anyways, I'll generally get to about a week up to 10 days prior to a race. I'll switch to decaf all the way up to that race. I'll have a bunch of caffeine on race morning so that my eyes are bugging out my head and I'm able to compete really well. And then I'll go back into drinking caffeine after that. So I just kind of naturally switch to decaf, about every month to month and a half or so. But it's a good habit to get into, right? So you buy a bag of coffee. Once you get through that bag of coffee, you switch to decaf for a little while, and then you switch back. And it's just a good way to cycle through those adenosine receptors.
Yeah, I like that too, because what I end up, I'm like an on and off caffeine person, and it doesn't really seem like there's a rhyme and reason to my cycling. And as a result, a lot of times I find myself just like craving the initial buzz that I get in caffeine, and I go back on it. And then at a certain point I get too addicted, and then I go back off. And this provides like some structure that makes sense for me that I can start to implement. So thanks, man. That's a good one.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'll do that naturally kind of decreases the amount of caffeine that I take in is when I travel. If I'm traveling across multiple time zones, I just quit caffeine during that period of travel. And it simply allows you to be more responsive to a lot of the symptoms of jet lag. It allows you to get into your circadian rhythm cycles a little bit better once you do get to where you're going. So I just, once I step foot on a plane to cross multiple time zones, I just tell myself, okay, I'm going to go coffee free or caffeine free for the next 2 days or the next 3 days or however long that international travel is taking. And that helps out quite a bit with reducing a lot of the effects of jet lag.
Yeah. And, I guess like in thinking about this, I remember one of the things you're saying, like why this should actually be a priority now that we have an understanding that too much caffeine too consistently can affect the quality of our sleep, is I remember you saying as well that according to research, like the single most crucial thing in enhancing our brain and mental function is actually getting adequate sleep.
Yeah, I mean, when you sleep, you allow yourself to produce adequate levels of leptin, which is an appetite regulating hormone, and also to ensure that you don't overproduce another hormone called ghrelin, which is a hormone that causes you to become hungry. The way that I like to remember this one is ghrelin. I think of the stomach growling, right? Ghrelin. Yep. And so your body simply produces more of this ghrelin, which is why it's so much easier to grab that Snickers bar or that handful of, candies on your coworker's desk when you are low on sleep, versus it's a lot easier to control your appetite when you've gotten enough sleep. So yeah, that's a big one, in addition to the fact that, you do, as I mentioned earlier, technically become more inflamed when you're low on sleep. So
let me ask you this. So, I mean, I know a lot of people that for whatever reason, maybe because of their diet, maybe because of their job or whatever, they've just been accustomed to getting like 5.5 to 6.5 hours of sleep. And their body is like regulating in such a way that like that's just when they naturally wake up. What is like the strategy to kind of revert to switch that to a more normal restorative number of hours per night? Because like I've been in those cycles, and I know that I actually need 8 hours, because when I'm eating and exercising and doing all the things I should be, I'll sleep like 7.5, 8 hours. But when I'm kind of like not eating right and all these things, I'll just get in this natural cycle of like only needing 6 hours. And when I wake up, or naturally waking up after 6 hours, when I wake up, it's like, oh, should I go back to bed and like try to force myself to sleep because I know I'm actually not getting the proper amount that I should be? Or should we try to change the diet first?
Shift your sleep cycles. You can push the reboot button on your circadian rhythm by shifting what's called sleep pressure. So you want to somehow get sleep pressure to onset earlier. Like if you're used to like going to bed at 11 p.m. or midnight or 1 a.m., you want to shift your sleep cycles somehow so that you can get your body to be in this state where it's getting tired around like 9:30 or 10 p.m. And then once the morning rolls around, you want to jumpstart your circadian rhythm as early as possible when you do get up, so that you shift that sleep pressure back. So what I mean by that is, if you wake up in the morning and you're not exposed to blue light, sunlight, some kind of a decent signal to your body that it's morning, then what happens is your body kind of stays sleepy later into the morning and then takes longer at night to get sleepy. So the way that you go about kind of resetting your circadian rhythm is based off of light, it's based off of melatonin, and it's based off of inhibitory neurotransmitters. And the way that you do this is, when you get up in the morning, sometime very soon after you get up, expose yourself to blue light, which is the wave spectrum that you're primarily going to find in sunlight. Now, in my office where I'm standing right now, I actually have special light bulbs installed that are made by a company called Lighting Science, and they're called Awake and Alert bulbs, which means that if I've got an early morning podcast or consultation or something like that to do, I can go into my office, I can flip on these lights, and even though my office doesn't get a lot of natural sunlight, because I live in the forest and I've got a lot of tamarack trees kind of surrounding the window that looks out from my office, I can still simulate a bunch of that natural sunlight in the morning, which helps to jumpstart that circadian rhythm. If I'm traveling, if I have the luxury of doing it, I like to just get outside in the sunlight for a little bit of yoga or like a light morning walk in the morning. But the more you can get sunlight or simulate sunlight in the morning, the better. You only need 15 to 20 minutes. The other way to do it is you can use blue light. Like they make boxes that emit blue light that you can sit on your breakfast table or your desk table. And they're called blue light boxes. They're used for seasonal affective disorders in many cases, for, people who live in whatever, Seattle or Portland and just get rained on and get, gray, cloudy skies all day. These blue light boxes can come in pretty handy. They're kind of similar to these lights that are in my office, and you just bask yourself in blue light for a while. And then in the evening, just to stick to the lighting standpoint, what you do is you expose yourself to red light, like infrared light, or light in the red light wave spectrum in the evening. So, for example, I've got light bulbs all in my bedroom made by this same company, Lighting Science, and they're called Goodnight Sleep bulbs. And they have no blue light wave spectrum. They're all red light wave spectrum. And then I've actually got like this $10 bulb that I got off of Amazon that is plugged in next to my bedstand that's just full on red light. It's like this nice warming red infrared light. And they've done some really interesting research that shows that when you're exposed to red light for about 15 to 20 minutes before you go to bed at night, it shifts that sleep cycle forward and causes you to sleep longer in the morning. So it's imagining like if you were back in like ancestral caveman times, you'd get exposed to sunlight at night and you'd be sitting, or sunlight in the morning, and you'd be sitting around the fire at night, right? So you get blue light in the morning, red light at night. And you're trying to replicate that in your modern post-industrial life to shift that circadian rhythm back into alignment. Now, the other two things that you can do at the same time, and this first one will be temporary, and that is the use of melatonin. I'm really not a huge fan of daily use of melatonin, because you could potentially shut down your own endogenous production of melatonin if you're not careful. But when you're first trying to reset your circadian rhythm, you can use anywhere from about 1 to 3 milligrams of melatonin about 20 to 30 minutes before you go to bed at night. And that can help your body to start to get used to producing melatonin, get it into sleep mode. So like if you're a midnight sleeper, you're like, okay, I really need to start going to bed at 10 p.m. You do this red light at night, starting about 9:30, you curl up in bed with a good book, you put on the red light, but then you also take melatonin at the same time to start to lull your body into that being the normal sleep time. And the other thing that plays really well with melatonin is this herbal extract that helps you to produce your own inhibitory neurotransmitters. It helps you to produce what's called gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. And GABA is a supplement you'll often see sold at health food stores and pharmacies as a sleep aid. But the fact is, it's better to encourage your body to produce its own via herbal methods rather than to take it in supplement form. And there's something called passion flower, which works really well for this. And you can get like a dropper full of passion flower off of Amazon or from many health food stores, and you dissolve this sublingually as you're going to bed at night, along with that melatonin. When you combine the melatonin with this inhibitory neurotransmitter, passion flower, as you're basking in the glow of that red light, you're all of a sudden really naturally pushing your circadian rhythm back into this cycle where it wants to go to bed at that time that you're in bed. And then you do the blue light in the morning, and within a couple of weeks, you can get yourself to that phase where you're sleeping, like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., for example. And it's a nice way to get yourself back into that 8 to 9 hour sleep cycle.
Wow, man, that's great. Those are some definitely useful tips for anybody out there that needs to reboot their circadian rhythms. Man, there's just... I know we could talk for hours about this stuff, and there is so many different things, but man, you've already given us so much value, Ben, and I know that there's just a ton more information out there for people that want to just really learn really how to optimize their health and their fitness. Where's the best place for people to get that information and more information on you?
bengreenfieldfitness.com. That's pretty much the easiest place to go. And from there, you can link to all my the books I've written and stuff like that.
Dude, well, thank you so much, man. I am probably going to listen to this 10 times over and over again just to get all the different things I want to change and tweak. But thanks, man. This has been fantastic.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, Scott. It was fun.
Before we finish up with today's Mindshare, I just want to say thanks for listening to another episode of The Competitive Edge. If you enjoyed the ideas in this episode and want access to future conversations, the best thing you can do is subscribe to The Competitive Edge on iTunes. If you haven't done that already, right now is the best time to take care of that and get on board. And while you're there, if you feel like this show has made a positive impact on your day, it'd be great if you could leave us an iTunes review so that more people can find the show. Now, I know we covered a lot in this episode, and there might be a few key ideas or tools that you want to remember. So we went ahead and compiled all of the notes and links mentioned from this conversation for you on lifelonglearner.com. That's life-longlearner.com. Alrighty, let's go ahead and dive into today's Mindshare. What's up, guys? I hope you enjoyed that episode with Ben. The guy is just insane. But anyways, today I thought I would talk about something a little different than health. One of the questions that people write in, ask me a lot about that I thought maybe would be a good chance to talk about here is, what books do you read? Well, to be honest, I really don't read that many books. But recently, I have read two that are actually part of a series, and they're absolutely fantastic. And the two books I want to recommend in this order that you should read them if you are so inclined is The Peaceful Warrior and The Journey of Socrates. And I believe both of these books are by a guy named Dan Millman. And they're of this genre of kind of like Ayn Rand, The Alchemist style books where it tells a story which has anecdotes that can be applied to personal life. And I believe The Peaceful Warrior is actually based pretty much entirely on a true story, but it's about the journey of a world champion gymnast and his mentor that he finds that teaches him a better way to live than being a hyperachiever who's constantly stressed out. And to be honest, like, this really spoke to me. Like, I'm definitely not constantly stressed out, but I do like to achieve, and achieving is great. But one of the challenges is that puts strain on our really just like how we feel, because if we're not achieving, if we're not achieving progress in our lives and truly evolving at the pace at which we want to, then, sometimes it doesn't feel so good. So for me, this book was really interesting, The Peaceful Warrior, because it was about how to just really stay present and live in such a way that not only do you achieve and live a very integrous life, but also do it in a way that's just more peaceful, more enjoyable, more rich sensory experience. I really, really liked it. And since I've been reading the book, I've found myself doing things like chewing my food slower or really paying attention to how it feels when I sit in a comfortable chair and the contact between my body and the chair and just different sensory experiences. And it's so funny because I just find myself sitting there smiling for no reason. One of the concepts of the book is just being unreasonably happy and having no good reason to be so incredibly happy and joyous, and how amazing of a place that is to be. And doing some of the things I talked about there in terms of just being hyper present, really feeling in the most rich sensations of life is part of the formula for being unreasonably happy. So I wanted to share that. And The Journey of Socrates is really a prequel to The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, also by Dan, but both excellent reads. And I really like reading these before I go to bed because a lot of times if I read like nonfiction, businessy style books, I'll get too wired. And this is like a nice balance where I feel like I'm reading a cool story, but it's also causing me to think about my life in a very enjoyable and peaceful way. So if you're looking for a good book to read, I think those might be a good place to start. All right, well, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Competitive Edge.